This is Shannon Holton, Real Salty Dietitian and owner of Sound Growth Nutrition and Wellness. For our Fun Friday research, I wanted to talk about food scares. The scientific word for food scares is chemophobia, and I'm using that and I'm kind of going into that because it kind of plays into the discussion that we'll have as far as the food scares and the big words and the ingredient list that people have a lot of concerns about. It's important to look at some of the laws and regulations around food labeling to decipher why foods are labeled the way they are and have the big word long list of ingredients that they do. And it's also important to make realistic comparisons, especially with some of the comparisons being about our food supply compared to other countries. And also the same with cost when we look at the cost comparisons. So to start out, we will look at some ingredient names and kind of explain why the ingredient names are the way they are. So for example, you may have seen in food products or on food labels things listed as tocopherol or things like sodium aluminum sulfate. Those sound really scary and are big words, but they actually really mean something very simple. For example, tocopherol is the scientific name for vitamin D. We know that in our food supply, we do fortify with vitamin D a lot because it is a sunshine vitamin, so you don't get that unless you're in the sun and getting exposure. And we know lifestyle dictates that a lot of people in America don't get enough sun exposure. And so many food products, particularly ones that have some sort of milk component, will be fortified with vitamin D, or it will say tocopherol. Sodium aluminum sulfate, that is an ingredient of baking powder. Now, why would you just put baking powder on the label? One of the rules and regulations around food labeling in our country is you have to list the full scientific name of the ingredients. So since baking powder is consistent of sodium bicarbonate, sodium aluminum sulfate, and cornstarch, they list them all three out separately. So think about a cherry that you pick off the tree. We love cherries. Grew up near the cherry capital in northern Michigan. So I'll use that example and show you the label. If you were to put a food label on a cherry and look at all the ingredients that are in a cherry that you naturally pick off the tree, it would have some scary sounding ingredient names too. For example, there's maltose, aspartic acid, cinnamic aldehyde. And who isn't scared of the word aldehyde? That's a scary word to me. You think of formaldehyde. Those are scientific names for the components that make up a whole, fresh, real, natural cherry. And so when you think about that, and then you start thinking about the labels you read and the ingredients on those labels, you will start to realize that, well, maybe that's just some natural components of the food that's being produced. It helps me to be able to feel a little bit more comfortable with that. It also helps to think through when I look at a food label and an ingredient list, maybe I need to do some searching. Maybe I Google, what does this name mean? Instead of being automatically put off or scared of it. And I think truly that the agencies that create and dictate these labels are trying to be the most transparent by requiring each individual component to be listed. But oftentimes it's kind of backfiring because we are seeing these big, weird, big, scary words that we don't understand. The differencing in labeling, for example, between us and a country overseas, could be some of those legislation. Maybe in Europe, it's okay to just say baking soda. Here, we have to list it all out separately. In addition to that, some of it is just untrue posting. So one of the things I did, I saw a post about a week ago that showed two of the same products, one here in the United States and one in the UK, that a popular blogger had posted. And it showed that the American version is, look at all these ingredients listed in here. Look at the European version. Well, number one, I already mentioned that it could be related to labeling laws and rules around that. But the other thing I did was I took like 2 minutes and I searched on a popular grocery store that has an app for that food product and pulled it up, looked at the ingredient list, and found that it just wasn't true. So if you're concerned about that, if you find something like that online, please always double check when you're going grocery shopping or when you're online ordering your groceries. You can check those labels and see, was that meme really true? It generated a lot of fear, and I saw it posted multiple times by multiple different people, and it just bothers me that people would not buy a certain product because they believe that meme, instead of looking at it themselves and realizing that it really wasn't true, and it's actually a food product that's probably pretty healthy for us and most of us should be eating instead of some of the other things we eat. So that is something that I want to impress, is that not all of it is true. Another example is looking at accessibility and cost associated with the good versions of products. There's a lot out there, especially in the last couple of weeks, talking about what Europe has versus the US in terms of regulations around particular ingredients. And yes, overseas they have banned certain products. I actually posted on a video previously a whole list of things that are banned in Europe versus the United States. And that said, those good versions are available here in the United States. You can get the good ketchup or the good juice without those processed ingredients in the United States. Well, then the other complaint comes in that, well, they're, more expensive. Why do we pay more here to have a special product than they pay for the standard in Europe? Well, that's actually not true either. It's not cheaper there because it's their standard. Example of that, I saw one that compared ketchups. Ketchup is one of those ones that we have a lot of controversy over because of the corn syrup versus real sugar additives to that. And in Europe, of course, they can't use that. So they have the version that's quote unquote the good version. And it's about a 7-ounce bottle, and it costs between about $6 to $8 US dollars. Whereas here in the United States, you go to, your chain grocery store and you can find the Simply or the natural versions of the ketchup that don't have those bad ingredients. And yes, they may be $1 or $1.50 more for that bottle than the plain or old version of ketchup, but it's still only about $4 for that Simply or natural version, and you're getting a 19-ounce bottle versus their 7-ounce bottle, and it's about half the price. So I do want to impress upon people that cost is relative. It's how you look at it and it's perspective. And here, yes, you have a higher cost associated with the good version, but there's also reasons for that as well. Again, I'm not trying to stick up for manufacturers because I do think sometimes they can get, a little greedy with their pricing, but I do think there is a reason. Some of the quote unquote good ingredients, they cost a little bit more to process. They cost a little bit more to keep on the shelves. They don't have as long of a shelf life because they aren't processed. And so you have to take those things into account when it comes from a manufacturing and shelf stable and, production standpoint. So there are some reasons why it would be, understandable that it would be more. If we didn't have it available to us at all to have the cheaper versions of the processed, versions, you would just have to pay the $4. So now at this time you have the option still. And what I always tell people is it's about perspective and it's about, how much to use. I'll keep with the ketchup example. In my house, I have 2 people that eat a lot of ketchup. So when they're eating something that has ketchup on it, they're dipping it in, swiping it through, adding it on top. It's a lot of ketchup. So I choose to buy the Simply or natural version, pay the extra $1, $1.50 for that bottle so that they're not getting the processed ingredients. If you're not big ketchup users and you just use a dab on top of your hot dog or burger, hot dogs are a processed food too, but anyway, if you just use a dab, then it may not be worthwhile for you to spend that extra dollars for that particular thing. But another product like cereal, let's say your kids eat tons and tons and tons of cereal, you might want to buy the better version and pay a little bit more so that you know that they're getting something that is a little bit healthier and a little bit less processed. So I hope that that clears up some of the confusion and the fear around ingredient lists. Also, the reality behind, the cost perspective and risk benefits, that type of thing. I hope everybody has a great Friday and a wonderful weekend, and I will talk to you next week.